The Ancient Gods Part 2 feels like the end of an era. I can still remember sitting in that crowd at QuakeCon back in 2018 during that first Doom Eternal reveal, and having my balls tingle as they showed off all of that new footage. They teased us with the Crucible and the return of the Archfire.
That's awesome, thank you.
Well, 3 years and 3 campaigns later, and Doom Eternal's gone on to become one of the most rewardingly crushing first-person shooters ever made. I would never have thought that Doom as a series would get to the point where people were able to break down the minutiae of every single aspect of the gameplay, from the weapons, the abilities, right down to the demon roster. I mean, you've got people out there figuring out all of these crazy weapon and ability combos that can just outright break the game. And this is all off the back of the original game, which you could have finished just using a shotgun. I mean, look at how far we've come. And I still really do think that Doom Eternal was an evolution for the genre in the way that it really took shooters to another level and made it so much more than just running around and pressing your left mouse button on everything. So, The Ancient Gods Part 2 feels like a bit of a culmination of everything that id Software has done up to this point, wrapping up every little piece of lore that we've been fed over the years and trying to differentiate itself from the other entries in the series as best it can. And after having played through it 3 times now, I think I can say that I like about 90% of what they pulled off here. I don't know if you can even really review this thing anymore because I kind of feel like everybody that's still playing this thing has already made their minds up. You either love what's going on in Hugo's fun zone, or you don't. And all the wholesome smiles this guy's gonna give off aren't exactly gonna change that. Getting back into part 2 of this DLC is actually the first time I've touched Doom Eternal since I finished part 1. And even though I was a little bit rusty, one of the first things I noticed just right off the bat is just how much easier this one is. I mean look, I'm far from the best Doom Eternal player out there. I don't have all the best weapon combinations memorized, and I sure as hell don't have the patience to do an Ultra Nightmare run, but I do think I'm a pretty decent player. I can get by on Nightmare most of the time without too much of an issue with the other campaigns, aside from like a few errors back in part 1 which had me staring at that game over screen repeatedly. But my point is that part 2 doesn't really suffer from that problem at all. In fact, I think it might be even easier than the base campaign. It was easy to the point that after playing the first level for a bit, I actually had to go back into the menu and make sure I was still playing on Nightmare mode because it just felt way too forgiving. Part 1, I had to play in small chunks. I'd play 1 level, then I'd take a break, go outside and get some vitamin D, then come back inside and play some more. Honestly, after finishing that UAC facility on Nightmare, I literally took a break for the rest of the day. Like, that's how intense I found it. Part 2 though, I finished in a single sitting. To be honest though, I kind of feel like id Software are in a bit of a damned if they do, damned if they don't situation. I mean, if they make the levels too easy, a lot of the more hardcore fans are going to complain about it, and if they make it too hard, well, it's going to alienate the other side of the playbase as well. I think it was Mick Gordon who said at one point that Doom fans are great until you do something that they don't like, at which point they're going to burn your house down. Part 1 really felt like it was aimed at that 1% of Doom Eternal players who turned the game into their bitch. Those super elite players who do Ultra Nightmare runs just for fun, in between swallowing swords and cage fighting grizzly bears. Part 2 now kind of feels like it's doing its best to include everyone, which has pissed off a lot of people. This means that there's less Cyber Mancubus, there's fewer spirits. I think there's only 3 Archfiles in the entire DLC, 2 of which are optional. Not to mention, they've removed the Slayer gates entirely. There's also other gameplay changes too, like I've noticed how the icons for all of your abilities are now located on the crosshair, making it much easier to see them under pressure. And faulted enemies also make a distinct noise and have this little dazed icon over their head, like you're playing Street Fighter 2 or something. So yeah, it kind of seems like they're trying to make sure that everyone can get over that finish line. It does have some annoying sections though, like there's yet another sequence in that purple shit that makes me think at this point that someone at id Software is really just trolling us. Because look, I don't know anyone that's really pining for more of those kind of sections, and yet they just keep bringing them back. I think that first big fight in the second level is honestly the toughest area in the entire DLC, and I got filtered during this sequence hard. Shook my head in disgust and apologised to my ancestors for disgracing them. But that's all that I can really think of, and I think other than that, I got into a pretty good groove. The combat areas are mostly really well designed. There's lots of jump pads that allow for fast traversal, and early on there's some really cool areas that let you take advantage of the meat hook. They are still sticking to their guns here with the platforming, but being able to use the meat hook for some of these makes them seem quicker and I think more exciting.
That's awesome. Thank you.
But the real new toy is the Sentinel Hammer, and this thing just outright trivializes some sections of the DLC. Doesn't do much damage, but what it's really supposed to be used for is stunning demons and increasing the amount of resources you get back. So if you freeze or flame belch them, then combine that with the hammer and you'll get back even more health and armor. You can even upgrade this thing by clearing out the gore nests, which makes it even more effective. But the other thing is that it also extends the falter time for the Marauders, making them even more trivial the 2 or 3 times you encounter them. Yeah, seriously, I think you come up against maybe 3 Marauders in the entire DLC and they're all pushovers. Yeah, remember back when Doom Eternal first came out and these guys were really menacing and threatening? Well, now they're about as threatening as a kitten on a beanbag. You recharge the hammer by shooting weak spots and getting glory kills, and seeing as you're probably going to be doing both of those things anyway, you'll probably always have a spare charge handy. About the only thing I don't like about the hammer is the faltering system's new sound effect, which I think combined with the sound effect for the hammer just makes it sound like something out of an entirely different game. Combine that with the visual of all of the dozens of pickup icons flying across the screen, and yeah, it really kind of looks like a cartoon at this point. But if nothing else, they sure went with the right choice with the hammer. I mean, it was either going to be that or, I don't know, some kind of axe, right? Like Part 1, Ancient Gods Part 2 doesn't add in any new enemies per se, but instead it just kind of makes variants of the existing roster. I know a lot of these are based off enemies from Doom mods, but it also kind of reminds me a lot of playing games like Streets of Rage, where you'd see the same enemy type coming back, just as a different colour. The first new enemy type you encounter is the Screechers, which are just reskinned zombies that buff up nearby demons when they're killed. So the concept is that you're supposed to leave these guys until the end, which is kinda hard because if you're like me, you're habitually flame belching or chainsawing the fodder demons almost instinctively, without ever thinking about the repercussions of splash damage from using weapons like the ballista or the rocket launcher. There's one instance though where it felt like they've really worked these guys well into the level design, and it's a bit during the 3rd level where you've got to deal with 2 Marauders at once, and the surrounding area is just full of these things. If you use the ballista too close to one of the Screechers, the shockwave alone is enough to kill them, buffing up both Marauders. And you don't need to be an expert on this game to know that 2 buffed up Marauders is bad fucking news.
Of course!
It just hones right into that puzzle combat aspect that Doom Eternal has really nailed. And it's a great example, I think, of how the different demon combinations can affect the combat loop and force you to adapt accordingly. I just kind of wish it had its own unique skin and wasn't a reskin, but I think it is a pretty clever new inclusion. Another new variant are the Armoured Barons of Hell with a giant mace on their right arm. And the idea here is that you're supposed to shoot the mace, then the armor drops off and you've got a short window to kill them before the armor recharges. You can also use the plasma gun to overheat the armor as well, but it seems like a slower process than just shooting the hand and having it all come off in a single hit. But again though, I don't mind these guys, because any enemy type that does its best to mix things up from having the player just swapping back and forth between the ballista and the super shotgun is alright in my books. It's the other enemies though that I'm just not so sure of, and after analysing all of these with a crack team of experts and a bunch of weebs, I can safely say that I just found these demons to be a little bit underwhelming. The Stone Imps, for instance, are just kinda lame. These are a reskin of the basic Imps with this new attack where they charge up and roll into you like they're Sonic the Hedgehog or something. Their weakness is to the auto-firing mode for the shotgun, but there's nothing clever about it. You just have to swap out to that weapon and use that mod if you want to deal with them effectively. You can also one-shot these guys with the shield on the chain gun, which I'm not even sure if that was an intentional design choice or just an oversight. The Cursed Prowlers are the new Ultra Nightmare Run-Enders. These are just a different looking Prowler that can curse you with a damage over time effect if they hit you. Yeah, take a hit from these assholes and you're cursed, which means you then have to chase after them without being able to dash, mind you, and then blood punch them to remove it. And if you haven't got a blood punch charge saved up at that point, well then, good luck. And I really don't like these guys because that's forcing you to play their game a certain way. And I know that Doom Eternal's always had ideal strategies for dealing with each demon type, but it's never outright forced you into a singular approach. It's just had better or worse ways to deal with them. Remember the chain gunners? Yeah, well those guys are back too. And I did find it kind of odd how people were looking forward to the return of what I think was one of Doom 2's most annoying enemies. These guys though are just a non-event, they're completely unthreatening, and just look like the shield enemies with a yellow shield instead of a blue one. But it's the new demonic troopers that seem the most out of place to me, and these guys just seem unfinished. These are enemies that unceremoniously show up in the 3rd level, really kind of coming out of nowhere, but about all it seems they can do is run towards you and shoot. But even then, they often seem to struggle with that. You can't chainsaw or glory kill them, which I think is only because no one was able to animate that in time. And they really just serve no purpose whatsoever outside of being a mildly annoying distraction. I'm also pretty sure this character model is just one of the multiplayer skins from Doom 2016 that's been reused, but I haven't been able to confirm that, so don't hold me to it. By far though, the biggest disappointment for me is that final boss. I guess it's no secret at this point, and I suppose everyone watching this video has probably finished part 1, but this entire DLC has been building up to this fight, the Slayer against the Dark Lord, in this special arena where they're supposed to have this epic climactic showdown. And the build up is pretty damn awesome. The Dark Lord's inside this giant suit of armor which makes him look like this towering threat. And considering he looks physically identical to the Slayer, well, you'd expect a pretty matched fight, right? Except what we get instead is a fight against what's basically just a tougher marauder. It even works off the same principles where you've got to kind of bait him into attacking you by hanging within a certain range and then only attacking him when you see a green flash. Attack without that green flash though and he'll heal himself, and you're going to see pretty quickly how annoying that mechanic can be. Just like the marauder, you spend a fair bit of time waiting until he does the attack you can actually counter. This fight comes in 5 phases, and the only difference between each of these phases is just the amount of stuff you've got to contend with. He gets a grenade launcher, he starts moving a lot faster, and can eventually also spawn in weaker versions of a Tyrant, Mancubus, Pain Elemental, and a Baron of Hell to help him out. You hope you got a hammer charge saved up for that one, bitch. There's not even any kind of animation when you attack him in between phases. You just blood punch him, he falters backwards, and then it begins the next phase. But probably more disappointingly than that, he just never even comes out of that suit. I mean, look, I think visually it's pretty cool. I like the concept of the Dark Lord being able to spawn in these spirits for assistance, but it just doesn't feel like the kind of final showdown I was hoping for. The fodder zombies that are standing around the edge of the arena are just the most blatant resource refills I have ever seen. I mean, I know the fodder enemies in general are just pickups on legs, but these ones just felt so dumb to me. Like they're literally just standing there waiting to be chainsawed, flame belched, or frozen. Then it all ends with one of the most unsatisfying endings I think they could have possibly gone for, which is as short as it is underwhelming. I mean, after all of this time and all of this work, the eons of ripping and tearing, the Slayer's then just sealed back into his sarcophagus, hopefully never to be needed. All of these hints we had of him having a family, the ties to his past, the Night Sentinels, the Makers, none of it is never explained. Nothing. I think the only real standout moment we get is that he utters another word during the final cinematic, but he may as well have just farted because it would have added as much character development. Within the span of about 30 seconds, you've saved Earth from the invasion and then you're locked and sealed back into your sarcophagus. Yeah, I'll take underwhelming endings for 200, Alex. Was it really too much for me to hope that they'd give this guy some kind of happy ending at this point? I'm not asking for him to be walking off into the sunset, and I don't need to know his name, his favourite ice cream flavour, or his star sign, but I don't know, man, just some kind of characterization would have been great. How about an ending that had him take up a new mantle, or even leaving us with the indication that he's going to continue his work protecting Earth? You ever see the end of Conan the Barbarian, where Conan's sitting on this badass looking throne, looking older, wiser, and confident in his surroundings? Something like that. I mean, they even added a Conan the Barbarian skin for this DLC, so that would have been the perfect ending. On the one hand, I kind of get it. When you've got a character that exists for a single purpose, to remove that thing that they work towards kind of removes the need for that character as well. It's like if there was no crime in Gotham City, there'd be no need for Batman. So once you remove that threat of the demons and the invasion entirely, essentially the Slayer no longer needs to function. Look, I know this ending is highly subjective and a lot of people seem to like it, which is fine, but I don't know, man, I was just hoping for something a little bit more. If he chose to be put back into that sarcophagus, well then that's something else, but to not have any control over it just kind of seems like a slap in the face. It'd be like at the end of RoboCop. RoboCop shoots Dick, he then has that little interaction with the old man.
Murphy.
Then they just put him back into that chair at OCP and shut him down. The final level opens with this awesome cinematic, which leads me to believe that someone at id Software spent a bit too much time watching Avengers Endgame, where all of your allies come out of these nearby portals, and this bit is amazing. It's honestly one of the coolest things I think I've ever seen in a Doom game, and I just had my hands over my mouth the entire time like some kind of pathetic fanboy. So to go from this 2-minute long cinematic setting up this biblical conclusion to a 30-second wrap up tying up 3 campaigns and 3 years of a storyline is just disappointing.
That's awesome. Thank you.
I'm not sure what id Software are planning to do next. I think either way though, this will probably be the end of the Slayer, at least for a little while. I mean, they might bring out some more master levels, but I can't see them really bringing him out of that sarcophagus again anytime soon. I don't really know how I'm supposed to end this video, probably much in the same way that id Software didn't know how to end that storyline. But I will just say though that overall I think they've treated one of gaming's most influential and important franchises pretty well. And to Hugo and Marty, if you guys ever want to give Quake, Heretic, or any other old FPS series the same treatment, well, you just go right ahead.